Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayanti Nashtaprayeshu Vadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Uttam Shloke Bhakti Bhavati Nashtake. So continuing with the discussion on Srila Prabhupada Lilamrita by Srila Goswami, Volume 2, Planting the Seed, New York City, 1965 to 1966, Chapter 19, Planting the Seed. So yesterday we studied how Prabhupada and devotees had gone to Anand Ashram, a little bit on the countryside from New York City, and had a nice program there. And they slept over there at night. And Howard, now he's going to speak about his experience. I awaken 3 or 4 times, and each time I'm flat on my back, looking up at the stars, which are always in different positions. My sense of time is confused. The sidereal shifts dizzy me. Then just before morning, I dream. I dreamed of devotees clustered about a beautiful golden youth. To see him is to be captivated. His transcendental body radiates an absolute beauty unseen in the world. Stunned, I inquire, who is he? Don't you know? Someone says, that's a Swami. I look carefully, but see no resemblance. The youth appears around 18, straight out of Vaikuntha, the spiritual world. If that's Swamiji, I wonder to myself, why doesn't he come to earth like that? A voice somewhere inside me answers, people would follow me for my beauty, not for my teachings. And I awake, startled. The dream is clear in my mind, more like a vision than a dream. I feel strangely refreshed, bathed in some unknown balm. Again, I see that the constellations have shifted and that the dimmer stars have faded into the encroaching dawn. I remember Swamiji telling me that although most dreams are simply functions of the mind, dreams of the spiritual master are of spiritual significance. Keith also had a dream that night. Keith, I saw Krishna and Arjuna on the battlefield of Kurukshetra. Arjuna was inquiring from Krishna and Krishna was reciting Bhagavad Gita to him. Then that picture phased out and the images changed. And then there was Swamiji and I was kneeling in front of him. And the same dialogue was going on. I had the understanding that now is the time and Swamiji is presenting the same thing as Krishna and we are all in the position of Arjuna. The dream made it very clear that hearing from Swamiji was as good as hearing from Krishna. The sun rose over the mountains, streaking the morning sky above the lake with colors. Wally and Keith were walking around the ground saying to Prabhupada how beautiful it all was. We are not so concerned with beautiful scenery, said Prabhupada. We are concerned with the beautiful one who has made the beautiful scenery. Nice thing to say. Later, Prabhupada sat next to Bruce in the Volkswagen, returning to the city. The car went winding around on a ribbon of smooth black mountain road, with lush green forests close in and intermittent vistas of mountains and expansive sky. It was a rare occasion for Bruce to be driving Prabhupada in a car because none of the Swamiji's boys had cars. They would always travel by bus or subway. It seemed fitting for the Swami to have a car to ride in. But this was only a little Volkswagen, and Bruce winced whenever they hit a bump and it jostled Prabhupada. As they wound their way on through the mountains, Bruce recalled something he had read in a book by Aldous Huxley's wife about the best places for meditation. One opinion had been that the best place to meditate was by a large body of water because of the negative ions in the air, and the other opinion was that it was better to meditate in the mountains because you are higher up and closer to God. Is it better for spiritual realization to meditate in the mountains? Bruce asked. Prabhupada replied, this is nonsense. There is no question of better place. Are you thinking that God is up on some planet or something and you have to go up high? No, you can meditate anywhere. Just chant Hare Krishna. Prabhupada is straight, straight, cuts straight through it, whatever nonsense we think of. After some time, the drive became tiring for Prabhupada and he dozed, his head resting forward. Bruce walked with Swamiji up to his apartment, opening the door for him, adjusting the window as he liked it, and preparing things in his room, as if he were the Swami's personal servant. Prabhupada settled back into his Second Avenue apartment, feeling pleased with the visit to Anand Ashram. The kirtan had been successful, and one of Dr. Mishra's foremost students had commented that he was impressed by Prabhupada's followers. Simply by chanting, they seemed to be achieving an advanced level of yoga discipline, whereas we have more difficulty with our postures and breath control. The United States' recently increased involvement in Vietnam was creating an increase of opposition to the war. On July 29, American planes had bombed North Vietnam's two major population centers, Hanoi and Haiphong, an escalation which brought expressions of regret from several allied countries, including Canada, France, and Japan. United Nations Secretary General U Thant openly criticized America's policy in Vietnam. Further opposition to the war ranged from the US Senate down to newly formed pacifist groups, and dissenters held peace marches, sit-ins, and rallies in protest of the war and draft. Religious protest was led by Pope Paul VI, and the World Council of Churches decried America's involvement in Vietnam and called for a halt in the fighting as a most effective step towards negotiation. On August 6, the anniversary of the bombing of Hiroshima, there were demonstrations in many major American cities, including a peace vigil at the United Nations headquarters in New York. On August 31st, there would be another 2-week-long peace vigil before the United Nations General Assembly building. And Mr. Larry Bogart had invited Prabhupada and his followers to open the vigil of prayers for peace. Larry Bogart, who worked at the United Nations headquarters, had become friends with the Swami and had volunteered his help by arranging to print stationery for the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. Wow. So from United Nations headquarters, he's printing the stationery for ISKCON. The letterhead was designed by James Green with a sketch of Radha and Krishna, and Mr. Bogart's name also appeared on the stationery at the head of the list of ISKCON trustees. Prabhupada accepted Mr. Bogart's invitation to the peace vigil. Prabhupada saw it as an opportunity to publicly chant Hare Krishna, so he was glad to attend. He announced to his congregation that Monday the 31st, instead of the usual morning class at 6:30, everyone should meet at the United Nations headquarters for a special kirtan. August 31st. Some met at the storefront and went by bus carrying kartals, a tambourine, and the Swami's bongo. Swami rode with a few of his followers in a taxi. The typical dress of his followers consisted of well-worn sneakers, black pants or blue jeans, and t-shirts or button-down sports shirts. Traveling uptown in the early morning put the boys in a light-hearted spirit, and when they saw Swamiji at the Union in his flowing saffron robes, they became inspired. Swamiji began the chanting, but right away, the peace vigil organizers stepped in and asked him to stop. This was a silent vigil, they said, and it should have prayerful, non-violent, silent. The boys were crushed, but Swamiji accepted the restriction and began silently chanting on his beads. A dignitary stood up before the assembly and made a short speech in which he mentioned Gandhi, and then he turned to Prabhupada and indicated that he could now speak about peace. Standing erectly, the UN skyscraper looming behind him, Swamiji spoke in a soft voice. The world must accept that God is a proprietor of everything and the friend of everyone, he said. Only then can we have real peace. Mr. Bogart had scheduled the Swami for 2 hours of silent prayer. Prabhupada had the devotees sit together and softly chant japa until the 2 scheduled hours were up. Then they left. As Prabhupada rode back downtown in the heavy morning traffic, he said New York reminded him of Calcutta. Amid the start and stop motion and noise of the traffic, he explained, we have nothing to do with the peace vigils. We simply want to spread this chanting of Hare Krishna, that's all. If people take to this chanting, peace will automatically come. Then they won't have to artificially try for peace. So Krishna consciousness is solution for every problem. Or the problems start because there is no Krishna consciousness. If we bring Krishna in the center, everybody, then there's no fight. There cannot be any fight. The New York Post ran a picture of Swamiji's group at the United Nations building. Steve brought the clipping into Prabhupada. Swamiji, look, they have referred to here as Sami Krishna. Prabhupada, Sami Krishna, that is all right. In the picture, some of the boys were sitting with their heads resting on their arms. Where are you? Prabhupada asked. Steve pointed, oh, you chant like this with your head down. Prabhupada had participated in the peace vigil to oblige his contact, Mr. Bogart. Now Mr. Bogart was phoning to offer his appreciation and agreeing to visit the storefront. He wanted to help, and he would discuss how the Swami could work with the UN and how he could solicit help from important people for his movement of Indian culture and peace. Prabhupada regarded Mr. Bogart's imminent visit as very important, and he wanted to cook for him personally and receive him in his apartment with the best hospitality. When the day arrived, Prabhupada and Keith cooked together in the small kitchen for several hours, making the best Indian delicacies. Prabhupada posted Stanley downstairs and told him not to allow anyone to come up while he was cooking the feast for Mr. Bogart. Stanley assented, blinking his eyes with a far-off, saintly look. Stanley stationed himself downstairs in the storefront. A few of the boys were there and he told them, you can't go up to see the Swami, no one can. About 12 noon, Larry Bogart arrived, pale, elderly, and well-dressed by Lower East Side standards. He said he wanted to see Swami Bhaktivedanta. Sorry, Stanley informed him, his boyish face trying to impress a stranger with the seriousness of the order. The Swami is busy now, and he said no one can see him. Mr. Bogart decided he would wait. There was no chair in the storefront, but Stanley brought him a folding chair. It was a hot day. Mr. Bogart looked at his watch several times. A half hour passed. Stanley sat chanting and sometimes staring off blankly. After an hour, Mr. Bogart asked if he could see the Swami now. Stanley assured him that he could not, and Mr. Bogart left in a huff. Upstairs, Swamiji had become anxious, wondering why Mr. Bogart had not arrived. Finally, he sent Keith downstairs, and Stanley told him about the man whom he had turned away. What? Keith exploded, but that was... Within moments, Swamiji heard what had happened. He became furious. He came down to the storefront. You fool, you silly fool. He turned and angrily rebuked everyone in the room, but mostly Stanley. No one had ever seen the Swami so angry. Then Swamiji walked away in disgust and returned to his apartment. see his followers, they just didn't know anything. And here Prabhupada became angry, furious, and chastising him, the boys. So many times people say, oh, you are a sadhu, you should not get angry. Well, of course, we are not sadhus, but Prabhupada was, and he was angry. So it's not like when somebody becomes a sadhu, he becomes like a stone, no emotions, nothing. No. All his emotions are for service of Krishna. And sometimes he gets angry also. Stanley had been going off the deep end for some time, and now he became even more abstracted in his behavior. Stanley's mother knew her son had been troubled for years, and she had therefore requested Prabhupada to keep a very close watch on him. But now the boy deteriorated in his responsibilities and stopped cleaning the kitchen and storefront. He would stand alone looking at something. He was gloomy and sometimes spoke of suicide, and he stopped chanting regularly. The boy didn't know what to do, but they thought perhaps he should be sent home to his mother. One day, Stanley went up to see the Swami. He came in and said no. Prabhupada said, yes. Stanley, may I have $50? Prabhupada, why? Prabhupada used to handle all the money himself. So when his boys needed something, even if it were only 25 cents for the bus, they had to see Swami. He was never wasteful. He was so frugal that whenever he received a letter, he would carefully tear the envelope apart and use the reverse side as writing paper. So he wanted to know why Stanley wanted $50. Stanley replied in a small voice, I want to purchase some gasoline and set myself on fire. Prabhupada saw Chuck at the doorway and told him to call Bruce at once. Bruce quickly came up and sat with Prabhupada and Stanley. Prabhupada told Bruce, whom he had recently appointed to handle petty cash, to give Stanley $50, and he had Stanley repeat why he wanted the money. But Swamiji, Bruce protested, we don't have that much money. There, you see, Stanley, Prabhupada spoke very calmly. Bruce says, we don't have the money. Then they phoned Stanley's mother. Later, Prabhupada said that because Stanley had asked for $50 for gasoline, which cost only 35 cents, he could therefore understand Stanley was crazy. Keith was cooking lunch in the kitchen as usual, but today Swamiji was standing by the kitchen stove, watching his pupil. Keith paused and looked up from his cooking. Swamiji, could I become your disciple? Yes, Prabhupada replied. Why not? Your name will be Krishnadas. This simple exchange was the first request for discipleship and Prabhupada's first granting of initiation. But there was more to it than that. Prabhupada announced that he would soon hold an initiation. What's initiation, Swamiji? One of the boys asked, and Prabhupada replied, I'll tell you later. First, they had to have beads. Keith went to Tandy's leather company and bought half-inch wooden beads and cord to string them on. It was much better, Swamiji said, to count on beads while chanting a strand of 108 beads, to be exact. This employed the sense of touch, and like the Vaishnavas of India, one could count how many times one chanted the mantra. Some devotees in India had a string of more than 1,000 beads, he had said. Then they could chant through them again and again. He taught the boys how to tie a double knot between each of the 108 beads. The number 108 has special significance. There were 108 Upanishads as well as 108 principal gopis, the chief devotees of Lord Krishna. See, that time they didn't even have beads. Now we have everything available in Vrindavan or any shop in ISKCON temple all over the world. And we can buy beads and we can start chanting. But that time there was nothing. The initiates would be taking vows, he said, and one vow would be to chant a prescribed number of rounds on the beads each day. About a dozen of Swamiji's boys were eligible, but there was no strict system for their selection. If they wanted to, they could do it. Steve, although I was already doing whatever Swamiji recommended, I sensed that initiation was a heavy commitment. And in my last strong impulses to remain completely independent, I hesitated to take initiation. Prabhupada's friends saw the initiation in different ways. Some saw it as very serious, and some took it to be like a party or a happening. While stringing their beads in the courtyard, Wally and Howard talked a few days before the ceremony. Wally, it's just a formality. You accept Swamiji as your spiritual master. Howard, what does that entail? Wally, nobody is very sure. In India, it's a standard practice. Don't you think you want to take him as a spiritual master? Howard, I don't know. He would seem to be a good spiritual master, whatever that is. I mean, I like him and his teachings a lot, so I guess in a way he's already my spiritual master. I just don't understand how it would change the situation. Wally, neither do I. I guess it doesn't. It's just a formality. September 8, Janmashtami Day, the appearance day of Lord Krishna. 1 year before, Prabhupada had observed Krishna's birthday at sea aboard Jalduta, just out of Colombo. Now, exactly 1 year later, he had a small crew of Hare Krishna chanters. He would gather them all together, have them observe a day of chanting, reading scripture, fasting, and feasting, and the next day would be initiation. So next day means it was actually Prabhupada's appearance day. At 6 o'clock, Prabhupada came down and was about to give his morning class as usual, when one of the boys asked if he could read from his own manuscript. Prabhupada appeared shy, yet he did not hide his pleasure at having been asked to read his own Bhagavad Gita commentary. Usually he would read a verse from Dr. Radhakrishnan's Oxford edition of the Gita. Although the commentary presented impersonalist philosophy, the translations, Prabhupada said, were 90% accurate. But this morning he sent Roy up to fetch his manuscript, and for an hour he read from his typewritten pages. For observing Janmashtami, there were special rules. There should be no eating, and the day was to be spent chanting, reading, and discussing Krishna consciousness. If anyone became too weak, he said there was fruit in the kitchen, but better that they fast until the feast at midnight, just like the devotees in India. He said in India, millions of people, Hindus, Muslims, or whatever, observed the birthday of Lord Krishna. And in every temple, there were festivities and celebrations of the pastimes of Krishna. And now he said at length, I'll tell you what is meant by initiation. Initiation means that the spiritual master accepts the student and agrees to take charge, and the student accepts the spiritual master and agrees to worship him as God. He paused. No one spoke. Any questions? And when there were none, he got up and walked out. The devotees were stunned. What had they just heard him say? For weeks he had stressed that when anyone claims to be God, he should be considered a dog. My mind's just been blown, said Wally. Everyone's mind is blown, said Howard. Swamiji just dropped a bomb. They thought of Keith. He was wise. Consult Keith. But Keith was in the hospital. Talking among themselves, they became more and more confused. Swamiji's remark had confounded their judgment. Finally, Wally decided to go to the hospital to see Keith. Keith listened to the whole story, how Swamiji had told them to fast, and how he had read from his manuscript, and how he had said he would explain initiation, and how everybody had leaned forward all ears, and Swamiji had dropped a bomb. The student accepts the spiritual master and agrees to worship him as God. Any questions? Swamiji had asked softly. And when he had walked out, I don't know if he wanted to be initiated now. Wally confessed, we have to worship him as God. Well, you're already doing that by accepting whatever he tells you, Keith replied. And he advised that they talk it over with Swamiji before the initiation. So Wally went back to the temple and consulted Howard, and together they went up to Swamiji's apartment. Does what you told us this morning, Howard asked, mean we are supposed to accept the spiritual master to be God? That means he is due the same respect as God, being God's representative. Prabhupada replied calmly, then he's not God. No, Prabhupada said, God is God. Spiritual master is his representative. Therefore, he is as good as God because he can deliver God to the sincere disciple. Is that clear? It was. So many things Prabhupada clarified there. He is as good as God. He is a representative of God. And also at one place, Prabhupada said, just like ambassador of any country. So as the ambassador of USA, if he's in India, then he is treated as good as president of USA. He's not president of USA. He's only representing USA. But he's treated as good as president. So God is also representative. Oh, I'm sorry. Spiritual master is representative of God. And why he's as good as God? Because he can deliver God to the sincere disciple. He can deliver. He can take us to the lotus feet of Krishna. That is spiritual master. It was a mental and physical strain to go all day without eating. Jan was restless. She complained that she couldn't possibly stay any longer, but had to take care of her cat. Prabhupada tried to overrule her, but she left anyway. Most of the prospective initiates spent several hours that day stringing their shiny red wooden beads. Having tied one end of the string to a window bar or to a radiator, they would slide one bead at a time up the string and knot it tightly, chanting one mantra, Hare Krishna, for each bead. It was devotional service, chanting and stringing your beads for initiation. Every time they knotted another bead, it seemed like a momentous event. Prabhupada said that devotees in India chanted at least 64 rounds of beads a day, saying the Hare Krishna mantra once on each of the 108 beads constituted one round. His spiritual master had said that anyone who didn't chant 64 rounds a day was fallen. At first, some of the boys thought that they would also have to chant 64 rounds, and they became perplexed. That would take all day. How could you go to a job if you had to chant 64 rounds? How could anyone chant 64 rounds? Then someone said Swamiji had told him that 32 rounds a day would be a sufficient minimum for the West. Wally said he had heard Swamiji say 25, but even that seemed impossible. Then Prabhupada offered the rock bottom minimum, 16 rounds a day without fail. Whoever got initiated would have to promise. See, Prabhupada's Guru Maharaj himself said, if we don't chant 64 rounds every day, we have fallen. But Prabhupada, he's an Acharya. And looking at the situation, he changed. He said, okay, it's minimum 16, no less. See, he can change that. Because he is Mahabhagavat, he is pure devotee. He can deliver the Lord to us if we just follow his simple instructions. They're simple, 16 rounds, it's nothing. In fact, later, once one devotee asked, so Prabhupada, you say if we just chant 16 rounds and follow the four principles, we can go back to Godhead. Prabhupada said, do you have any doubts? So obviously after that, that devotee never had any doubt. But Prabhupada can do that. We just have to have faith in him. The bead stringing, chanting, reading, and dozing went on until 11 at night, when everyone was invited up to Swamiji's room. As they filed through the courtyard, they sensed an unusual calm in the atmosphere. And in Houston Street, just over the wall, was quiet. There was no moon. As his followers sat on the floor, contentedly eating prasadam from paper plates, Swamiji sat among them, telling stories about the birth of Lord Krishna. Krishna had appeared on this evening 5,000 years ago. He was born the son of Vasudeva and Devaki in the prison of King Kamsa at midnight, and his father Vasudeva immediately took him to Vrindavan. He was raised as the son of Nanda Maharaj, a cowherd man. Prabhupada also spoke of the necessity of purification of spiritual advancement. It's not enough merely to chant holy words. He said, one must be pure inside and out. Chanting in purity brings spiritual advancement. The living entity becomes impure because he wants to enjoy material pleasure. But the impure can become pure by following Krishna, by doing all works for Krishna. Beginners in Krishna consciousness have a tendency to relax their efforts in a short time. But to advance spiritually, you must resist this temptation and continually increase your efforts and devotion. So this was Prabhupada's message on advancement, on initiation. So we'll stop here. See anybody has any questions or comments. So tomorrow we'll read about first initiation. Okay, you all have safe and wonderful day. Hare Krishna, Jai Srila.
Hare Krishna, Jai
Hare
Srila
Krishna.
Prabhupada.